Hello and welcome to another gameplay commentary video for GiantSlayerTV. Today we'll be watching a game from the perspective of Faye on patch 12.4. This game was played on the second day of the latest patch that introduced the mid-set Neon Knights. As such, it is during the rank climb and is in the Diamond Master MMR bracket. With any new set or major change to the game, the goal when climbing the ladder is learning about a few key aspects of the meta. What compositions are doing well is part of that, but learning how to transition at each stage of the game and how to play a strong board is as important, if not more important. The gameplay showcase today is meant to highlight parts of that philosophy while utilizing one of the new carries introduced in the mid-set, Zeri. Let's go ahead and get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. You should also follow our GiantSlayerTV social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. As always, we're beginning with the opening carousel. There's a few bits of information to keep in mind with a new set or a mid-set like Neon Knights. The meta is, for the most part, still being figured out. Of course, there are plenty of compositions players were using during the PvE, but the large amount of games played on the live servers often evolves differently than day one builds from PvE. Because of that, a lot of the aspects of the game are still being figured out, such as item priority. Faye knows that based on the meta from the PvE and what's been played in games and streams after release, there's a lot of flexibility between auto-attack carries. Tryndamere, Sivir, Jhin, Draven, Zeri, and Jace, among others, are all viable in different ways. But it's worth noting that Last Whisper isn't as important given beefy frontlines like Bruisers and Colossus are more prevalent than full-on bodyguard frontlines. That means Sword has more value as a first component to make items like Giant Slayer or Infinity Edge, more so than grabbing a glove or bow to make a Last Whisper. As we see, that's what Faye goes for and is able to secure. Let's talk about goals during the downtime of Stage 1. When learning and climbing ranked on a new set, it's important to learn what is and isn't strong in the early game. Thankfully, the mid-set doesn't completely alter everything about the game, so there's enough previous knowledge to know where to take an early game board. But there's still a lack of information in regards to new champions, traits, and augments and how best to utilize them. That means win streaking can be difficult, especially with the variance of augments. So the goal here for Faye is to go on a loss streak in Stage 2, stabilize Stage 3, and try to spike with a fast level 8 in Stage 4. Having concrete plans is a good way to learn whether it goes well or not. The first major decision is here with the 1/4 augment, and it's a spicy one right out of the gate as we're going prismatic. Of the three options here, the least likely to be taken is Celestial, not because it's bad per se, but because it affects the early stages of the game the least. Featherweights is fantastic for win streaking if you're hitting upgrades, but so far that hasn't happened, making it hit or miss for this game specifically. It's also fantastic for playing reroll boards, but that is not on the radar for Faye this game. That leaves Exiles an augment that can cause positioning trouble later on in the game, but adds a good amount of survivability for most boards. Faye ends up taking it with the intent to have her units survive long enough to kill one or two enemies. Moving into Stage 2, Faye wasn't able to hit any major upgrades for her board and has a standard 2 components plus gold opener. With 2 swords and a chain vest, the possible slammable items aren't great, though Edge of Night may be worth it. That means the best option is to aim for a loss streak, which was the goal Faye already had in mind going into the game. It's worth noting that Caitlyn is a fantastic champion for this purpose because oftentimes her ability kills off a squishy enemy unit. Other ways to play a loss streak board are, of course, Yordles and Mercenaries, both of which are still viable in the mid-set. So far, so good for the game plan, as Faye is on a 3-loss streak going into the 2/4 carousel round. Losing also means she has early carousel priority, which is important considering she had few options with her early components. The decision here is between a bow and a glove. Bow is used for quite a few items, but in this case, it's likely for Giant Slayer. Gloves would be going towards an Infinity Edge. As both components are on a 3-cost champion, it most likely comes down to preference. Game knowledge also comes into play here, as a lot of the meta favors beefy frontlines with Bruisers and Colossus, so the best choice is going to be bow with the intent to slam a Giant Slayer. At the end of Stage 2, we see Faye lose another round, putting her in the all-important 5-loss streak. It's important to focus on keeping that streak going throughout Stage 2, otherwise you're just going to be losing health for no real gain. In this case, Faye is down in health compared to the rest of the lobby, but will have 50 gold going into Stage 3, meaning she has more options later on. But it's also worth keeping in mind that playing for a loss streak is dangerous if you don't stabilize your board in Stage 3, as continuing to lose puts you in a do-or-die situation with your health. Moving into Stage 3 too, it's time to stabilize the board, especially after losing the previous round on 3-1. Faye has a few options here, but the strongest way to make her board stronger without rolling gold is to simply level to 6 and play Bruiser plus Hex Tech. This gives her quite a few synergies, and the increased health from Bruiser helps the Exiles augment be more useful. Plus, Hextech provides additional shields to Sejuani and a slight damage boost for Nocturne. Another potential route was to roll on 6. This is often necessary after a loss streak, but Faye has held onto enough champions with useful synergies that even if she takes another loss, it shouldn't be by much. From Prismatic to Gold we go as it's time for another Augment decision. The options here are quite good for Faye with multiple potential avenues. Metabolic Accelerator would help Faye recover health, but the downside is it provides no board value. Backfoot is another strong augment when playing backline champions, but with Exiles, it may be difficult to make full use of it. Finally, Golden Gifts has the potential to boost Faye's economy and provide more board strength, but it is a risk as there's no control over what comes out of the orbs. In the end, Faye decides to risk it as either Champion's Gold or components are likely to drop from the orb, and all of those help her board. Backfoot was a valid option as it would provide combat strength to the board, which would have helped Faye stabilize the board. The orbs end up giving 11 gold worth of value, and luckily for Faye, 2 4-cost champions are useful for her board. Alistar is the replacement frontline Colossus for Scion in the mid-set, and while his targeting is nowhere near as effective as Scion's, he still provides additional frontline and CC. And of course, being a Colossus, he has a lot of health, which pairs nicely with Exiles. The benefits of being low on health from a loss streak continue as Faye is able to snag a Sivir from the carousel. Rod isn't necessarily ideal, but it can be turned into a Rage Blade, assuming Faye sticks with Sivir as the carry. With multiple Hextech champions already, it makes sense to aim for that composition. Intending to continue winning, Faye does level to 7 and plays Jhin, Orianna, and a 4th Hextech. Even though her board has gained more cohesion, it is still a bunch of 1-cost units at this point, meaning she overall lost value. This can definitely be considered a misplay, as selling multiple 2-star units is generally not great unless you have an equally strong transition planned. Stage 4 is where Faye ideally wants to level to 8 quickly, sometime between 4-2 and 4-5. Having not rolled during Stage 3 and taking an Econ Augment on 3-3, it's definitely an ideal situation for Faye to level fast. That said, doing so can be a risk, especially if you roll on level 8 and hit nothing. In the current meta, it's generally preferred to roll at level 7 just to guarantee the same amount of board strength. Faye is able to get away without rolling because the gold orb dropping 2 4-cost champions, Orianna showing up shortly after, and picking up Sivir from the carousel. While our board is still full of 1-star units, Exile does make up for the lack of health a bit, so overall, even without rolling, Faye still has a mostly stable board. Still, losing at level 8 is expected, so always make sure you're comfortable playing on lower health before committing to a strategy like this. It's leveling time. After leveling, Faye still has over 30 gold to roll. With an already established board, she's looking for upgrades, but instead finds a potential transition with a VIP Zeri in the shop. It's definitely a risk to take a 5-cost without Nikos, but VIP Zeri is quite good, though her board doesn't currently have any Debonaires. At the end of the round, Faye does win thanks to the transition, and now has a defined path to take her board. The problem is, of course, a lot of 1-star champions, but as we said earlier, Exiles does make up for that problem slightly. The value of VIP Zeri shows itself even at level 1 as she is able to kite around a melee carry like Tryndamere. What this shows is that even though the decision was a risk, Faye is now on a 3-win streak heading into the final Augment round. The final major decision of the game is the 4-6 Augment, and it's once again a choice of 3 gold tier augments. Loon's Echo is great for specific compositions in the early game, but at this stage it's unlikely to add as much value as the other 2 options. Treasure Trove may help with her economy, but there's a high chance it does nothing for Faye's current board. That leaves Disintegrator 2, an augment with a lot of combat power, particularly in a lobby with a lot of beefy frontline. At the end of the day, the best decision is what helps you win rounds. Disintegrator is the most likely to help with that. The largest issue going into Stage 5 for Faye is a lack of upgrades on her board. For now, she's in an okay position, but definitely needs to hit in order to comfortably place in the top 4. Luckily, Zeri is kinda good. Ortdog has smiled upon Faye this day as no one has denied her the Zeri 2 from the carousel. And it even had a Hextech emblem, which is a strong emblem to give to a champion like Zeri. From here on, the goal for Faye is to scout, position well, and play for level 9. Faye has now made it into the top 4. The item from the dragon is alright for Faye since it does well on Alistar. It's also important to scout what other players got this round, especially if it's utility like Shroud or Zephyr that you'll need a position for later. The introduction of the in-game combat tracker has made it easier than ever to scout in position, so if you aren't doing that, we definitely recommend doing so. Unfortunately for Faye, there's not a lot of wiggle room in positioning because of Exiles, but the plan is to try to have her Alistar hit a large group of enemy units while Zeri is positioned away from any threats like Zephyr or Assassins. At the end of the round, we see Faye is easily able to clean up the enemy units and heads into the top 3. Again, the in-game combat tracker helps a lot for a situation like this as Faye is able to position around the enemy Shroud. From there, it's an easy dub, and Faye is now into the top 2 against a win-streaking player with far more health than she has. After a second loss to the first place player, it's clear that Faye needs to do something else with her positioning to win the game. It's not always doable, particularly on low health, because one positioning mistake can lose you the game. And honestly, Zeri is a wild card because her targeting can be a bit wacky at times, so a lot of the fight comes down to positioning with a dash of RNG thrown in. It is worth noting that not having an Alistar 2 is definitely an issue for Faye's board, as level 2 Alistar is a significant upgrade she's missing out on. The Mort Dog diff again as the PvE round drops a Nico's help so Faye can finally 2-star her Alistar. Now all Faye has to do is properly position and potentially a win is in sight. The likely final round begins with Faye continuing to get a good shroud onto the enemy. Zeri is also in a good position to hit the backline, and as the fight progresses, Faye is the clear winner and makes a comeback from being down around 40 health to take the dub. That's all for today's video, folks. Learning the mid set can be daunting, particularly for this set with all the new augments to keep track of. The best recommendation we can give, as we saw in this game, is to have a plan going in and try to stick to it. Anything that goes poorly or well can be a learning experience. Let us know in the comments section below what you'd like to see in our next gameplay commentary video. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.